Good evening everybody, welcome to the studio this evening. Let me zoom this camera out a little bit. Actually I'll need to change the position of that camera because otherwise you won't be able to see what I'm doing. So excuse me while this just goes all sorts of weird direction. Let's see if I can get this a little bit more over towards my point of view here. If this snake will stay where I want it to go. Well, I can't quite get that too far over here, but that's not too bad because I'm going to be carving in this area tonight. Well, at least at this moment in time. So, one is undercutting. And by that what I mean is we are cutting an angle back underneath the wing here, and doing that will give the impression that the wing is actually separate from the baseboard. Now, I haven't got a lot of space in here because of the tail, but we'll see what we can do. And I can see I'm going to get chips all over the floor tonight. Ah well. I was just about to say at least they're wooden, but then of course the thought did occur to me that chips in America are different to chips in the UK, if I remember correctly. American chips are what we call crisps. I think Americans call them fries, is what we call chips. This acute bend here is going to cause some difficulties, but we'll see how we work around that. Generally speaking, I'll try and undercut this as much as I can. May not be that successful, just depending on just how much I can get in, but we'll do our best. When I do this, the shadow line that you see basically hardens up, becomes a lot more sharper edged, and that's a clue to your brain that the space underneath, and therefore your brain thinks the wings are not joined to the wood. Sometimes it's easy to fool brains. Yeah, I'm not really going to be able to undercut the very edge here, because it will just crack off if I do that. What I am going to do is cheat a little bit. I'm going to cut backwards just around here. Again, it gives a little bit of that same impression. Not as successfully though on these tips, but we'll do it as much as we can. Going to be quite difficult doing around here just because of the sharp angles involved. Yep. Okay, so what I'm doing is relief carving. Don't quite know where the that name came from originally, or whether it's meant to be descriptive of relieving the image from the wood, you know, sort of excavating it or releasing it from the wood. That may be where it comes from. Don't really know, but it's not a true 3D carve. It's a sort of a 2.5 3D carve. This dragon, for example, is fully affixed to the wood board behind. So whilst I'm carving the front and sides of it, I'm not carving the back. Hence my description of 2.5D. That's not particularly an official designation by any means, and I think it's a relatively useful one. Carving this into a wood called European lime wood, or in America and actually quite a few places else in the world it gets called basswood. It's a useful wood for carving. It's quite a friendly wood because the wood itself is got quite a close grain. The density across the grain is fairly consistent, which makes certain carving aspects easier. Although the wood itself is relatively weak, and what that means is, you know, some areas like the fingertips here, these wingtips, will break off fairly easily if you're not careful and apply too much pressure to them. But certainly for beginners, which I still class myself as a beginner, it makes it's a lot easier than other woods. It's also relatively soft. I'm carving this very easily with hand tools. I could use power tools, but they don't really wouldn't really add anything. A lack of control, if anything. But they are. It is easy. It is relatively easy to carve. Although it does mean also, being a relatively soft, easy wood to carve, you do need sharper tools as well than you might do otherwise for a slightly harder wood. That being because you actually need to ensure you cut the wood, not just sort of bully it out of the way, push it out of the way as you might do with a slightly blunt tool, especially if you're using power techniques of any kind, like a mallet for example. Now I've been carving for a total for about 3 years, although I've not done a significant amount of carving over that time period, which is why I certainly class myself still as a beginner. I've probably completed no more than about 10 pieces. And some of those have been carved using power techniques rather than hand carving techniques, and a mix. At least one piece has been a mix of both. There's no, I've got no particular reason not to use power carving techniques or mix and match. I haven't done so on this piece just purely because the power carving stuff is behind me. And I'm not, and it's a bit difficult to get it to reach. It also generates a lot of sawdust, and by dust I literally mean dust, really fine stuff, and I normally would prefer to run an extractor fan, which is also behind me, which is what I do normally when I'm doing that, and you know, that's behind me. The camera here is in front of me, the computer's in front of me. It's a little bit difficult to stream from over there, but also because of the dust I generally speaking prefer to wear actually a chemical mask. The filters are a little bit better than most particle masks, but then trying to stream with that on is even worse than listening to Darth Vader. It'll be very mumbled, very muffled, and really quite hard for you to hear. May attempt to do some of that later on this year though, we'll see how it goes. That thunk you may have just heard was the chisel slipping out of the wood and hitting down into the baseboard. Something I actually really don't want to happen is that, because it then creates quite a deep cut in the baseboard, which then creates a shadow line which doesn't look right, so I end up having to lower the level of the baseboard in order to cut that mark out of there. Now, I'm not fantastically too bothered at this stage because I do have to do some more carving of that baseboard. I have left it slightly high on purpose, precisely because of that sort of reason. And you should potentially there, if it's audible above the fan, be able to hear the sort of shushing noise from the wood as I'm cutting down. That tells me that I'm cutting the wood cleanly, and it's an agreeable sound as well. It's a nice sound, but it does mean I'm cutting correctly. I'm cutting through the wood, I'm not pushing it out of the way. When you're carving, sometimes the sound of the wood, or the sound that's made when you're carving, can often tell you a lot about how the carving is going and whether or not you're actually doing it right. If I was to get some sort of like a dull sound, for example, it possibly means I'm cutting the wrong way against the grain or something like that. So generally speaking, if it doesn't sound right, it probably isn't right, and therefore you should be looking to see what it is that you're doing wrongly. Now this bit of the wing here is quite high, it's quite easy to see underneath, so I'm trying to cut this back as much as well, not as much as I can, because it's kind of how much dare I cut it back, but I'm trying to cut it back at a fair distance. Also, the other advantage that this gives me is just right on the edge I can thin the edge as well. Now I'm not going to make it as thin as a wing really would be. It would be really paper thin like that, but and therefore quite fragile. But I am going to. It's probably about 2 or 3 millimeters now, which is probably sufficient. Actually, I've just gone all the way through there. It's not really a problem. But that wasn't what I intended to do. Okay, now again, bit of an awkward angle just underneath here. It's really sharp, so it's quite an awkward place to do this sort of carving in, undercutting. So instead of using the big flat blade, what I'm having to do here is use a little tiny gouge. It's about the only tool that I've got that will actually get into this space. And all these chisels that you see me using here fit into the handle, so it's a replacement handle, which is don't quite know. I suppose the company probably market it as a potentially sort of like, you know, save a little bit of money, but it's quite useful. Saves up space. You don't actually need a handle on every single chisel, so they take up a lot less space when you've got them packed in the case, which is quite nice. One of the other nice things about this particular manufacturer is they do make available an adapter for these as well. So that if you like a replacement handle, and that replacement handle will go into some of the power tools that drive chisels in a reciprocating motion, and a bit like it continuously is a hammer drill. Sorry, a hammer action on the blade, which can be very useful when you're carving hard wood. So the tools have a sort of a dual use. Normally, sort of hand chisels like this you wouldn't be able to use for that purpose because they'd have fixed handles. Zone Zero, good evening. No, I'm not going to detach the wing at all. This wood will not isn't strong enough to really do that. Or rather, I mean, I could detach it from that perspective, and it would support it, but it'd be very weak. It would be very easy to just sort of bend it very slightly, and the whole wood would just crack off. This style of carving you don't carve the back anyway, so there is not a lot of point in me fully detaching it in this particular case. It wouldn't add much to the piece itself. They're normally viewed sort of from the angle that you're looking at it, really. So detaching it really wouldn't do anything. So this whole back plane is a bit like a frame that it's on, although it's out of the same piece of wood. So it'll stay there. So this rock, that's more or less the extent of it. I might do a little bit more texturing on it, especially when I clean up around the edges, but essentially this is in its final form. The purpose here of doing this is to make it look like it has been detached, and that it's it's a thin wing, not a great big bulky block of wood. So it's a little bit about fooling your brain. And now that I've started to undercut some of this, I do have to be a little bit careful where I push down. I'm not likely to crack off these edges, but because they are still reasonably well supported all the way across, because I've cut diagonally down rather than straight in. If I cut straight in, then they're less well supported. By going diagonally, the forces are better supported. But with sufficient pressure it would be fairly easy to break off bits. And the main trick now in doing all this is to actually make it look neat underneath there, so if anybody does take a look, it doesn't look like I've hacked it with a chainsaw. Although in some ways, whilst I haven't used a chainsaw, it is somewhat analogous to being very, very rough cut. we'll do for the moment. We're going to do on the front edge of the wing now, but to do that I'm going to need to turn the piece around. So I'll just see I've undercut. It's a bit rough in there. I'll maybe get a knife in, or we'll see what we can do about tidying that up afterwards. But that then gives you quite, even at quite reasonable angles, you can still see underneath it. So it looks like it's separate from the back plane. Okay, so I'm going to do under here now, as much as I can anyway. Now this is really just to stop I'm not exactly holding this wood down with the clamp. It's really just to stop it slipping. This blue mat is a it's a non-slip mat. It can and will slip if you put enough pressure on there, but so all I really need to do is just apply enough pressure so that it doesn't really move too much. Yeah, the problem is trying to get a sander that's small, to be honest, Zonzera. You're looking at a sander which needs to be about half the width of this chisel in order to physically get in there in the tight corners. It's the angles that are the most untidy area, just because there aren't too many tools that are narrow enough to get in there and smooth it out. My best bet probably actually is to use something called a micromotor and actually use a power tool. And well, I've got a couple of choices actually. I'll show you a micromotor. Actually, I'll show you the other one as well. This is this thing here. That's the size of it, but this is what's called a micromotor. It's a bit like a sophisticated Dremel or a higher quality Dremel. So this thing runs something around 38,000 RPM at full speed, which is a little bit faster than a Dremel, and it's a heck of a lot quieter. And it takes all sorts of bits, but this at the moment it's got a dental bit in it, for example. Quite often use dental bits, they're a lot better. This one is a router type bit, but if I use like a diamond burr, literally a dentist drill, that will have the effect of working like a sander. So that's one way of doing it, and I potentially can use this as well. But this is actually quite a rough cutter, believe it or not. This will chew through wood without too much trouble. So one slight hitch and I can ruin the wing. Another tool that I can use in preference to the micromotor, because sometimes that micromotor is a bit slow, and it will, as I say, it will chew through wood quite easily. Sometimes I'll use this. This is an air-driven turbine. This also is a dental instrument. It's driven by a large compressor, so the air is fed in here. This does again take dental drills. This runs at about 360,000 RPM, and again it can chew through wood, but if I jam it too hard into a piece of wood it'll stall, which tends to help protect sometimes. But this one is a little bit better than micromotor because it's a lot thinner, as you can see. I can use this very much like a pencil for getting in. So I can use that one as well if necessary, and I can get into that sort of area, but I won't be doing that on stream, unfortunately. and I'd need to go out into the workshop and turn the compressor on to be able to do it. But now this area here around this thumb is going to be a little bit interesting. I don't quite know whether I'm going to undercut the thumb at all. I might a little bit, because that would be a relatively weak area. And as I've managed to preserve those all the way through the carving up to now, I don't really want to crack them off in the final stages. Incidentally, both of those tools, not only do I use them for woodworking, I do also engrave glass, do what they call low relief carving in glass, or engraving in glass. So it's not particularly deep, and I use both of those tools for that as well. And again, unfortunately, I can't really show you that on the stream because I don't know if you caught it earlier, but I'd need to use the extractor fan, especially with the glass, of course, because it would generate glass powder. Not the sort of thing you want to be breathing in. This chisel wants a little bit of a sharpen. So we'll give it one. So this has just been sharpened, or it's more honed, I guess, on a strop. So we're not doing this with sharpening stones or anything, they're far too aggressive. Just a few passes with some polishing compound on the strop, and this thing will be like a like a brand new chisel. Okay, good evening, welcome to the studio. Hi, have fun. I am indeed having fun. I hope you too are having fun as well. I can't really get a camera into a position where you can see this very easily. You ideally need to be exactly where I am. Hello. Or perhaps hang the camera off my stomach. But then unfortunately, if I did that, my hands would be in the way. There's two more stages after all this undercutting is done, and then before we call the piece complete. That is to tidy up the background. There's still some areas that need to be smoothed, excavated out. This bit here, for example, is significantly higher than it should be, and there's a lot of tidying up to do around this backboard area. But then once that's done, the final thing is really just to go over the whole piece and just do the odd areas that don't quite, tidy up little bits of slivers of wood and marks that shouldn't be there. So relatively speaking, we're quite close to the end. Time wise speaking, there's a few hours yet to go. Right, you can see me working a bit here to tidy things up. One thing you don't do when you're carving is you don't leave a wood off. You often see that with beginners or people who are unfamiliar with carving. They'll do something like that and then try and lever it off, and what can happen then is you can split the wood, and with this wood, for example, I could end up cracking a whole area of this wing off. So it's whenever you create a slice of wood down there like that, I've created a slice of wood, always cut it off, and if it won't cut off, you've not cut far enough. So you keep working on it until it comes off naturally, basically. I know it's kind of feels natural to just try and just leave it a little bit, but I have experience even when I'm cutting it properly. Sometimes the wood will split away when you really didn't want it to, and that's just just the pressure pushing like this can sometimes be enough to do that on weak areas of wood. And today is the day when I get wood shavings all over the carpet. I've been relatively lucky up to now, but I can just tell this stuff is really close to the edge of the desk. I'm a little bit lucky with this wing in that the way in which it does is it comes down and over the side really, so it kind of joins the baseboard naturally, which is quite useful, because as long as I can follow that line down there like that, a little bit more, there we go. Zonzozo, thank you very much for following. That is, I was going to say most excellent of you, but thank you very much. I do really appreciate you doing that. I'll move to the side of this camera. By the way, if you're wondering, not quite sure what that is the camera that you're looking down at the work with. That's the camera that's showing my face. And there you go, I've got a piece of wood there that's not coming off. It means I haven't cut it far enough. So rather than trying to pull it off or lever it off, there we go. Just needed a little bit more of a cut and it popped off. Zone Zero, thank you again, thank you for following. Just to let you know, don't always carve, by the way, if you are expecting to see that all the time. I do alternate some other crafts as well, in case they're of any interest to you. So we take them in turns and do about 5 other crafts at the moment. Generally speaking, we spend about a week or so doing each of them in turn. This one, this dragon has taken well, has been a lot longer than that. This has been going for about 3-4 weeks now. But generally, about a week and a half, something like that. About 10 hours of stream time doing the others. So that's pyrography, punchcraft, scraper board, carving, and also some jewellery making, chains and necklaces, that sort of thing. So when we were doing that this afternoon as well. I also have some fuse beads around here which I want to try out at some point. Right, I need to get right into that corner, so I'm going to need to use a tiny gouge. We'll use it upside down. Ideally I want to leave as much of that thumb intact as I can. I don't really want to undercut that at all. And we'll see how that goes. I've undercut that quite a way. We'll see how it goes, see whether it looks any better a bit later. One of the things I do want to do though is, now that I've done that, I can shape these wing bones a little bit better. And round them off a bit so they won't actually look quite as thick as they do at the moment. So that does mean I need to undercut that a bit more. Not quite at the HB spin this big. It's the only difference between this and a smaller piece is the time it takes to do. And sometimes that in itself is a little bit of a nebulous thing. I should just clear that. I mean, for example, I've got a piece here. Now this particular piece, I'll zoom out a little bit. This particular piece is, well, clearly it's a rose. This is relief carved, and as you might be able to tell, but it's really shallow carved. It's a really shallow relief, which is kind of not really normal. It's usually a bit thicker than this. This one's quite thick for relief carving, but this is unusually shallow. Now this took something like about 20 hours to do, and yet this one is not quite twice as long yet. You know, this is about in the order of 30 hours, and you can look at it and go, yeah, this is ash, that's basswood or European maple. This is really hard to carve, and so you know that this took such a long time to cut, which is why I hadn't carved the rest of the background down here, because to do that would probably take another 20 odd hours, or ideally I'd use power tools on that, whereas this was all done by hand. So it's not particularly the size of the piece. You know, these two are roughly about the same size. You might think this was easier to do. This one's been easier to do, just because the wood is a lot softer. So it's not fun. It's not, you know, the larger the piece doesn't always mean it's harder or anything. In fact, sometimes the large pieces can be easier to do, as long as it depends on the piece that you pick. This, for example, for me has been quite difficult to do. It is my largest piece so far, but the fact that it's been difficult is not the size of it, it's the positioning, so of certain elements. So for example, let me zoom in a bit more now. See the head here, the head and the arm, or the wing bone here, the main wing bone, they're virtually touching here. So when I want to carve in this area here around the head, it's been really difficult because there isn't a lot of space. So similarly just down here, and if you look down here at the tail, carving in this area has also been quite difficult because there's very little space for the chisel. As you can see, the chisel won't go in there. Or you might take my word for it, it won't quite go in there. It's not quite wide enough. And especially before I carved that down, it was up at the full height, and I couldn't get a chisel into this area at all because of the tail being in the way. Yeah, if I'd done something as simple as turn the tail out the other side, I'd have had plenty of room here, and because on the other side, if the tail had come out on this side here, I'd have still had plenty of room to carve this and get the chisel in. So just something as simple as that, and that's, you know, it's carving experience, if you like. That's something I learnt doing this. So if this piece had been physically larger still, then I'd have had more space in there to get the chisels in. So it's you know, it's big sometimes is easier than small. I mean, I have been carving on pieces of wood about half this size. I hate to think how I would have managed to carve this on a piece half the size. It would have, yeah. Challenge is not exactly the word I'd use for it. I'd certainly would have been swearing at it, I suspect. Okay, so we've sort of done under that wing. Again, need to tidy up, but it's enough to create that shadow that you can see underneath, and therefore it looks like it's a separate wing. Actually, I was shaping around that wing, wasn't I? So let me just do a little bit of that. So what sort of things do you actually create then, Zen0? And have you streamed them? Yeah, I'm quite keen to see other streamers doing stuff as well, so it gives me something to watch on Twitch. So I'm always but I'm always interested in what other people do. That's creative. That's how I came to doing the jewellery stuff that I was doing this afternoon. Was because I saw somebody else doing it and thought, hey, that looked really interesting, and I wanted to try it, and so I did. And the fuse beads that I've got as well, again another streamer that I saw doing it, and I was fascinated by that. Wanted to have a go, so I've got some fuse beads over there. The streamer actually helped me locate a set, which was very nice of her. Actually, whilst I'm talking about jewellery, just since it's in front of me, I've got a couple of pieces here that I made. There's a bracelet there in whilst it looks silver, well, I'm actually not here. It's actually a lavender colour. It's a sort of a purpley, a light purple colour, lavender, with gold highlights in there. So that was a bracelet that I made. This is a particular type called a Byzantine weave of rings, and what I was doing this afternoon was another one. Still, but this is a Byzantine as well. This one's in orange is this particular colour. This is part of a necklace, so it's the start of a part of a necklace. Which I am making for somebody. I haven't got anything else around at the moment, jewellery wise. You like drawing robots and many other creatures? Oh, that's cool. I was going to say I'd love to be able to draw creatures. Creatures is animals. Animals. I know you don't mean cats and dogs, but other creatures. Creatures is something I find quite difficult, or any sort of biological thing I find quite difficult to draw. I'm quite good at inanimate object drawing, but drawing animate objects is something that I find a little bit difficult. I do need to practice. I just don't have much time to practice. These days I'm streaming more, streaming in most of my free time. So one of these days I'll actually have to practice the drawing on stream, I think, and that way I can actually get some in. I don't hate drawing people. I'd love to be able to draw people properly. To actually be able to draw a likeness, so you can draw a portrait. The weird thing is I can do it with an airbrush. I can create a portrait with an airbrush in black and white, but I can't easily draw one. I can draw them, it just takes me a long time, and I'd love to be able to sort of draw them a little bit more quickly, shall we say. So I will have to practice, but doing creatures and things. Lol Kid Lol, good evening. Welcome to the studio this evening. I haven't seen you for a while. How are you doing? Yeah, creatures. I mean, I can see them in my head, which is weird for an artist, because generally speaking, you draw what you can see. So if you can see it in your head, I ought to be able to draw it, but I can't. Although I know some of that is actually having the confidence to start. And if I start, I might be able to do it, but I still think I can't. And that's thinking you can't actually is one of the worst things, because generally speaking, it's self-fulfilling. If you think you can't, you don't always start. If you don't start, you definitely can't do it. So. But yeah, I do love watching people who can actually draw and do that sort of thing, especially from their imagination. You finishing school, little kid? Oh, okay, I'll finish. Yeah. It's on 0. Yeah. To be honest, though, I mean, I know it's often quoted, but it's practice. You know, I'm saying like I can't draw people, or I can, but not very fast. But it really is just practice. I know it's practice. I'm not practicing, so I'm not. You know, if I don't practice, I won't get better. Now, I've got to be careful here not to crack the wood, because what I'm doing is driving a wedge in there. Despite the fact it's cutting, I am driving a wedge in there, and if it pushes it up, it'll crack. So it's a bit of a cliche, you know. You've got to practice, but it really is true. You know, I wouldn't have been able to carve this. I wouldn't have known where to start when I first started carving, but now, you know, having practiced some things, I can. As well as just having the confidence to do it. I've done some actually scraper board's the other thing that I do. I've got some scraper board over there. I've got 2 pieces of it, which are 2 scraper board pieces that I've done. They're the only 2 scraper board pieces that I've ever done. Never touched it before, and I've got 2 pieces over there, both done on stream. The first one was a portrait, and the second one is a moonscape. It's Earthrise, and I'd never done any scraper board before. Both of them have come out really nice. One of them, as I say, is a portrait, and in both cases, especially with the portrait, there were some areas in there that were, well, of the face basically, which were really daunting, and I kept leaving them and putting them off, and but eventually I just kind of did bits and a little bit more and a little bit more, and eventually it was done, and I kind of surprised myself with how good it actually is. I'm saying that myself, of course. I mean, I did it, but I actually do think it's quite good. And so sometimes it's just confidence and almost belief that you can do something. And I know, well, it's nothing to do with creative art or anything like that, but one of the things I do at work, or have done at work, is if there's something I couldn't do, I went and did it. So for example, I didn't know how to be a project manager, so I went and did a project management job and learned how to do it. So you know, that's kind of an illustration of I didn't know how to do it, so I practiced, and then I could. That's a really just this bit here is because it joins up to the body. It's quite difficult to separate it. You might recall earlier I said don't leave the wood, cut it. There are times when I wish I could break that rule, but I know the first time I do, I'll seriously damage whatever it is I'm working on. Sorry, by the way, my face is hidden by the camera, but I thought you guys would prefer to see what I'm doing rather than look at my face. Okay, now I need to get in there with a little tiny chisel. So this is a V gouge. You know, you won't be able to potentially see it, but I might get an impression there of it being V-shaped. And it's a little tiny one, so it will actually get in some of these small spaces. Now I'm not going to bother trying to undercut the body. It just wouldn't work very well, I don't think. I'm just doing the wings because they're the things that you kind of expect to see as being separate. The body is kind of clinging onto the rock, so you know, the fact that you can't see underneath the body is not something which tends to bother your brain. It sort of is half expected, so it's quite happy not being able to see under. Now this is just a little bit of waste wood that's been left around from earlier on in the carving process. I've got the whole background still to do some more work on, but this is just removing a chunk of it now. From where I undercut the head. Being a little bit careful when what I'm doing is making a stop cut, what's called a stop cut down. It's called a stop cut because the idea of it is to stop the wood from splitting. I'm being a little bit careful because what I don't want to do is to dig too deep downwards, because it then leaves a mark in the back board, and that mark in certain lights especially can be extremely visible and distracting, and it, you know, detracts from the piece. I kind of got everything else perfect, and just one of those marks left in the wrong place, and it makes it look really untidy. Okay, so let's just tidy up that. There's a lot more work. I say this area here is too high. That's it's sloped and it shouldn't be. So now we do under this, the top of this wing. I've already done underneath there, so we're not far off. You've carved a few stamps. Okay, that's not bad. And used scrapers. I haven't got any scrapers here actually. These are all chisels of various shapes and sizes. You know, this is a chisel. It's sharp. It's not a, well, I suppose scrapers are as well, but this is meant to be driven forward. It's literally a V-shaped chisel. Sorry, V shape. You know, like the letter V. This one is a similar one, but this is U-shaped. Only about a millimetre or two across. Little tiny tools. In fact, a bigger version just to illustrate. So this one is a bigger version of the U-shaped tool. Extremely sharp edges, and especially the corners. Okay, that's fair enough. Reason I wasn't sure is because there are actually tools called scrapers. I'll just show you the V. Oh, that's a larger V-shaped tool. There are actually tools called scrapers, and which are used in woodwork. And generally speaking, they're not shaped like this, which is, and you can see it's got a bevel on it, so it comes to a point. Generally speaking, they're just kind of cut square across, so like very much like the edge of this, for example. And you use a scraper in a draw action, so like that. You'd scrape that way. You don't usually use chisels for it, although it is possible to use a chisel. You blunt your chisels by scraping with them, though. So I don't generally do it a great deal, but it can be useful to use a chisel, especially like now when I don't have any scrapers. But they're used in that sort of draw action, and they do actually smooth off wood. Generally speaking, they're used on large areas like here, or if you think like a guitar body, it would be used on the back plate or the front plate, really to smooth off the whole area. And the reason why they use scrapers is because if you use like a chisel, for example, you can create little tiny pockets, divots, so it's really hard to get the surface flat. You use a scraper and you keep scraping until the whole area is a uniform colour, and you know it's flat. That's assuming your scraper was flat. But if your scraper's got a profile, a shape on it, like a U or something like that, you can use it to create shapes as well. So there are actually tools called scrapers for carving or for working in wood. So I wasn't completely sure whether you meant the chisels or whether you meant you actually did meant scrapers. So what were the stamps for then? Little tiny, you mean little tiny stamps or great big stamps? Or and did you actually use them as stamps? Did you put ink on them and turn them into something? Of course, there isn't a lot of difference between a stamp and a printing press. Generally speaking, they're the same thing used in a different direction. If you put the stamp onto the paper, you're stamping it. If you put the paper onto the stamp, you're printing it. So actually, there's I think there's a woman on Twitch that does lino carving. Carves an image into a square of lino material, linoleum, and when and she carves it backwards. So she removes the area which is darkest and leaves areas which are the lightest, and then she's having created the lino cut, as it's called. She then put ink on it, put a piece of paper on it, and actually printed out a picture from it, which is quite cool to watch. So then, of course, all she needed to do, put a bit more ink on there and another piece of paper, and she got a second copy, and so on. So it was really cool to watch. So again, she was using lino cut versions of tools, so slightly different tools. Lino, seems like lino, most of it was tools that cut towards yourself, whereas chisels tend to cut away. But slightly different set of tools, but it was similar sort of idea and really fascinating to watch. 3D Bloke, good evening. Yes, you stamped from them as well, Zanzi. Well, that's great. Actually making something and using it like that is absolutely fantastic. 3D bloke, good evening. You've done some lino cutting, have you? Radiator, yeah, an eardator. Yeah. I've never actually been particularly motivated to try it, to be honest. Not as particularly had an inspiration to do a lino cut and print, but as I say, it was fascinating to watch that one time. I think these days I've got to pick and choose what I'm the crafts that I want to try. Too many things to do, not enough time. I think if I started another one at the moment, my wife would have words with me. So how are you doing? Has your inspiration returned yet? What's lino? Linoleum. I don't actually know what it's made out of. It's a flooring material. Yeah, I literally do not know. I have no idea what it's made out of. I was about to ask if your inspiration has returned and you feel like streaming, but of course it's the weekend, so you don't. Anybody who's watching, by the way, 3D bloke who is in chat now is an airbrush artist. Occasionally plays games like Kerbal Space Program, although I'm not sure you've streamed it yet, have you, Free? He's also been an animator and quite a few other things, electronic skills. So yeah, check him out when he streams. Generally speaking, when he is streaming, Monday to Friday, 10 PM in the UK for a couple of hours, and so if you're wanting to keep an eye out for him in the future, if you look at the clock, in about a quarter of an hour it will be 10 o'clock in the UK, so wherever it is in your time zone at the moment, that's roughly when Free is streaming that he will be on. He's doing some quite interesting stuff in black and white, and also some abstract work as well, which is quite fascinating to watch. Ooh, that's a lot of travelling. You've just been into London not so long ago as well. I think I saw the tweet of. Well, I really do hope you feel better soon, Free. It's not nice being like that. I have just remembered what the streamer name that I was trying to remember this afternoon and this evening, who sort of inspired me to try the fuse beads, and that's Bubbles the Monkey. Unfortunately also has been a little bit off at the moment, a bit ill and unable to stream. She's been doing a really nice, very large piece actually in fuse beads. Sorry about that, Free. Actually hope they recover, but not an easy time for anybody. Right. Now this right edge here is a wing bone, so I don't actually want to make this too thin in this area, like I have done on the back. I mean, I've not made it super thin, it's not paper thin or anything like that, but I have to remember this is a bone, and therefore it is expected to be reasonably thick, shall we say. I don't want to be accidentally making it too thin, and therefore it looking not right, and I have made that sort of mistake before on this wing. This wing has been carved about I think this is the fourth wing I've actually carved here. So in some ways it was quite lucky that this piece of wood was quite a thick piece of wood that I started with. If I'd started with my normal sort of thickness of relief carved wood, which is about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, then I probably would have had to throw the piece away and start again. Come along, piece of wood, you're going to come out whether you like it or not, so you might as well do it sooner rather than later. Talking to the wood does help sometimes. What sort of, yeah, headpiece. It's well, yeah. It's really hard to get a good position to show you what I'm doing. I guess I can't actually get a tripod in at the side of me, because that perhaps might be a better position, sort of a fairly low tripod perhaps, but. And if I put whilst I could put the face cam say up on top of the monitor, you'd be looking at my bald head most of the time. So at least this way, you get more of a face view. I suppose what I can try and do, let's try it, because this camera will zoom in a bit. So if I lift that up like that, and I zoom in. then it moves the camera out of the way, and I know that needs focusing. I've got a second. The camera's on like a snake, a microphone snake, and I've got a second one. And the problem is I can't fasten the two together tight enough by hand to join it on, which would then let me position the camera in all sorts of weird places. But even with a couple of mold grips, I can't actually get it tight enough. It annoys me. There we go. Goggles on my glasses. I keep thinking actually about, talking of goggles, I keep thinking about perhaps getting an optivisor so that I can see things better, or at least potentially sit further back like this, then I'm not, and still be able to see things. But yeah, getting camera angles, sort of thing. Well, I'm going to say it's sort of thing a lot of the gamers probably don't have to think about, because they've only got one camera. The other one, of course, is the screen. Here we see, as creative people, we have to be cameramen, multi-cameramen, lighting directors, design, graphics design, to design the screen, directors to know which camera to move where. Okay, no problem. So when you become a creative streamer, you don't just do your creative thing. You've got all this other stuff to think about as well. And now I've got a website to think about as well as that. So now I've got to get into content management systems and learn how to use those. Work out how to design a template. But I'm actually determined to do it right. I can write raw HTML. But I really don't want to be doing that on a website. I'd rather have the CMS do it for me. But I'm having to learn absolutely everything from scratch. Never used a CMS before. So I've even had fun trying to get the thing installed. Yep, lighting specialist, that's right. Yeah, actually, I was half thinking about getting a couple of gels in that respect, because of the this camera has a sort of an insensitivity to red when it's mixed with another colour. Not on its own for some reason, but like purple it sees as blue. And I was thinking about maybe getting a couple of gels on the light and seeing if I can sort of push a little bit more red into the light and see what the camera does with it. Either or I'll just go out and see if I can find some quality streak with lots of red with red wrappers. Might not be as good, but it would certainly be more fun to prep the filters that way. Right, so I've got a bit of carving to do around the thumb here because I can see that there's a ridge which doesn't want to be there. Yeah, wrong way to carve that. The wood is so fragile, relatively speaking, that it's really hard to carve this around here. Certain areas of this wood are really spongy, and this is one of them. And the wood comes off really too easily. Now this is a wing bone, so what I want to try and do is round it off, and since I've undercut it, I'm going to try and take the rounding on the bottom side as well. I'm close to sticking my tongue out. Yeah, I think there's quite a few people. Bubbles has it as well. It's the 920 or the Logitech 900 series cameras. Yeah, Chris has exactly the same colours, the purples. They all show up blue, and I noticed Bubbles. I think she has a 920 as well. On her plastic beads, the purples show up as blue. And I have actually noticed that this camera of mine, which, you know, obviously I've noticed it with the rings, because I've got purple on there. But one of the things I've noticed with this camera sometimes is, it probably wouldn't do it now, but if I take this board away, the blue, for some reason, actually I'm guessing it because if it is blue sensitive, the camera loses complete video sync, just like it loses horizontal synchronization. You just get vertical color lines and all sorts of colors. You know, the camera basically just overloads and gives up. Cover the blue up, it comes back. Doesn't do it on auto if you set autofocus, which is real weird. So I think it must be sort of overly blue sensitive in some way. It's been funny, you know how you invoke the "see what happens" curse, and he shall appear. It's been quite fun because I was watching another stream the other night, and actually the Matt Pendleton, the train sim guy, and for some reason he he was effectively doing, well, look, let's try this and we'll see what happens. And every time he said it, I actually just cracked out laughing. It was just, I half expected Chris to pop up and make some comment. He didn't, but it would have been absolutely hilarious if he had. Of course, there would have been very few people who would understand the joke, but now I've rounded that bone off now. Now that I've undercut, and it actually looks more like a bone, which I'm quite pleased about. It looks sort of too square before. So I can just do it down here because we've now undercut most of it. I've certainly done all the wing. There's some tidying up to do, but yeah, I don't know what it is about the sensors. I know the cameras are actually relatively they are quite sensitive. I mean, strictly speaking, I think I'm actually overloading this camera a bit now. Let me have a look. Yeah, I'm really close to overloading this camera. This is what's up above the camera here is it's an 11 watt compact fluorescent, so that's probably what 11. That'd be about a 40 watt light bulb effect, and it's about a foot above the camera. It's the main light here, but it's enough to actually the camera is close to overloading. And yet I can't easily do without it. So let me just turn it off. I'll just see what the camera does. Yeah, you see the colour goes all weird. The colour balance goes. Mind you, I haven't got the colour balance set either. Try that. I'm just playing with lighting now. Yeah, there's not enough light. The gain is now right up as high as it'll go, and the colour balance, of course, has changed, which is weird because I'm using LED lighting in here, and the LEDs are cool white LEDs. Yeah, the colour balance is shifting as though they're red. I have got an uplighter which is actually puts out a bit of good light next to me, but it gets real hot when I put that on, so I don't really want to use that, which is why this one's here. Ah dear, like a genie pop up when he's mentioned. I was wondering maybe if to mention him 3 times, for him to appear. See what happens. See what happens. See what happens. Nope, it's not working. The Logitech seem to be quite well respected cameras for webcams. I almost thought about getting actually trying to use the a video camera I've got, but the video camera I've got is just TV resolution, which is about 576 pixels across. And of course, you know, webcams these days are full HD, and it won't be long, I think, before we've got the quad resolution webcams coming out. The 4K ones. Generally speaking, though, the only difference is the lenses. That's a domestic video recorder type cameras, anyway. In that these are on these sorts of cameras, the little tiny plastic lenses, and of course you tend to get either the large format plastic or the glass lenses on domestic video recorders. Sensors tend to be the same until you get into broadcast quality stuff, and then that's TV broadcast quality, and then it's a completely different kettle of fish. Right. So let's take this off the mat and take a look at it. The GoPros, though, have got a bit of a wide angle lens, haven't they? I think they're slightly more of a fisheye. I think they've now a 4K version, haven't they, of the GoPro? But yeah, I've heard lots of people say it's quite hard. Yeah, the reflections is a problem I've got here. Don't always see it though, because you get the bloom, you get the hot spot even off of this, which is a fluorescent, and whatever you get that glare off of it. If I take if it was just the wood underneath here on the desk, it does now show a real hot spot, and that's even with it. I did try putting a diffuser over it, but it didn't. It's still a big white target. You've really got to use a lot of light around the place, but then of course these cameras, which are meant for domestic use, of course can't take that amount of light. So you then got the problem, and you can't easily fit a neutral density filter on the things. Well, I've probably got one around somewhere. I could maybe tape one on, I suppose, because it doesn't need to be too strongly attached, shall we say? Yeah, and oil paints, of course. Yeah, with it being wet. Let's zoom out a little. So one like Miss Cookies probably actually would be a lot better off using I don't know if she's using Logitech or something like that, rather than using a webcam, actually using a video camera into sort of the slightly more professional range, because that way they'll be able to stand the brighter lighting conditions and be able to adjust their gain downwards, which webcams aren't. Webcams are tended to designed, of course, to work in offices and rooms which are, relatively speaking, poorly lit. I mean, if I turn mine off, and I haven't got a poorly lit room here, I've got something like about 200 watts effective lighting in here, but you can see over in this corner of the room, it is actually, relatively speaking, quite dark. Most of my light is actually pointed straight down at the desks, so it's task-based lighting, but 200 watts of light and it still looks dark. I mean, it always looks dark to me when I've just turned the light off. I keep having to look to make sure that all the lights are actually on. Yeah, actually, that's an interesting thing. Actually, whether a reflector, I know you're reflecting off the walls and things, but whether a reflector would actually work. So bounce them off a white sheet rather than a silvered reflector. But that might actually work a lot better, of course, because the white sheet wouldn't have to scatter things. Anyway, interesting thought. Can't do it here. Maybe in the new studio, when or if that actually happens, I can think about better lighting and maybe put some put a reflector up or something like that. So we've done a fair bit of undercut now. So underneath these wings here is all undercut. Yeah, certainly with flash I would bounce as well, but of course the flash is significantly brighter, so the bounce works. If I point this this 40 if I point this 40 watt at the ceiling, I'd get very little bounce, relatively speaking. I've got a 350 watt uplighter to the left of me, halogen uplighter. If I turn that on, then it works quite nice. Actually, let's try it. There we go. Let me turn that off. Yeah, apart from the colour, that's not too bad. Right, and let's just, yeah, that's not too bad with an uplight. But the problem with that is it's 350 watts of heat. I could do with that being an LED. So what? Roughly similar lighting would be what, about 20 watts of LED lighting. And throw that up. The 350, it gets really hot in here if I leave that on for a long time. It's great in winter because this room is quite chilly, but in summer, that's why I've got the 40 watt. Because the CFL, of course, is quite cool. But I actually do like bounce light like this. I really much like working with that rather than the big bright CFL. But anyway, is this going to focus? Let me turn that off anyway, and let me put this one back on. Yeah, I wonder where that chisel had gone. There we go. Put it over there for now. We've done enough of this tonight. I think we've undercut all the wings, and you can see that now. You see the hard shadow. So you get a hard-edged shadow when with it undercut, and so your brain interprets that as there being space underneath. Whereas you can't see it as very easily, but down here, for example, the shadow that's down here is kind of a soft shadow. You can see it here as well. It's kind of a soft shadow, and that is because the light's bouncing off of it and not giving you that hard edge. And in doing that, you don't see it as clearly as being separated. Now, I haven't undercut this yet, and I don't actually know I'll do much of it, but you kind of haven't got an expectation that this panel of the wing here is going to be separate from the rock, because it is, you know, it is so close, so to speak. And of course, when you look down from the top here, even though there's no shadow, and there would be if I tilted it right, but you can still see behind the wing panels. Same on this side, which makes it look like, and unfortunately the video camera is a little bit of an awkward thing to see it with, but when you're looking you can see under it, so again it makes the wings look like they're standing proud of the surface, of the background. Just a little, it's just one of those little tricks of perspective and shadow lines that make things look completely different. I can't do it, but there's forced perspective techniques as well, and I've seen some carvers who use that on relief carving, and they can make something which is 2 millimeters tall look like it's going about 6 miles backwards, just from the way they do forced perspective. It's an amazing skill. Yeah, it does get warm really quickly, and thank you very much, Just Jessup. Good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, good evening to both you, to you, as it is for me. Unfortunately, you're catching me as I'm just wrapping up. So, what have I got left to do on this? I've got, underneath all of these areas here is untidy. I want to smooth them off. I don't have, in theory, I don't have to be too bothered about it, because you don't look under there, but you do. And people will. So I want to sort of tidy up under these undercut areas, and I've got a little bit more I just noticed to undercut there. So I want to get rid of all I'll zoom in so you can see the sort of the rough areas, but and of course I'll have to manually focus this camera now. You can see in here how rough it is, so the wood's not particularly smooth. And I may actually get the micromotor out to do that, because then I can use a dentist drill. Not the easiest of things to use, to be honest, to smooth off, but it does get rid of the rough wood. And then I think I might undercut the body here a little bit as well, or at least put a mark, some sort of marking in, so that it looks like it's against against the mountain, because I think that looks that area there looks a little bit too sort of not quite right. But those two sorts of broad areas, and then this background, all these sorts of marks in here that I can see and you can't at the moment, but like here for example, you can see that mark. There's one across here, and there's actually quite a few just around, rough areas around here. All of this needs smoothing off or chiseling smooth, and an area that's in here wants quite a bit of material removing. It's way too high relative to the back. The thought just crossed my mind is it almost looks like a mountain in the background. With some of these chisel marks. I could cheat and leave it, but I think I'm going to try and work on it. But once that background's done, we're done. So maybe I would say maybe two more streams, and we might have this done. Okay, bye Zone Zero. Just Jessup, have you actually gone out and bought the train sim? There are training if you have, there are training guides in the application itself, which will teach you. I don't drive with a keyboard, so I actually don't know, to be honest. I use the rail driver these days, and that's just pushing levers. The brakes are, especially on the steam trains, are quite hard because of the way in which they work. What sort of question do you mean by how do you drive the train, Just Jessup? I mean, in theory, you if you're talking about a diesel, you just take the brake off, push the throttle, and away you go. Where do you drive that? Sorry. I'm a bit confused. Okay, let me take a guess. If you've got the application, you've just started it up. How do you actually get into driving a train? You've got a couple of ways, which I think appear on the front panel. You generally speaking have career mode or free roam. You're probably easier starting with career mode. Yeah, it's really hard with it. It's a while since I played it as well, and I haven't find it up. Free is right. There are some there. I know that front screen is relatively confusing. Let me see if I can fire it up on one of my screens here. See if I can get you at least to start into starting. Where on earth is it? Bam, bam, bam. Oh, it's in Steam. Train sim. Let me turn that down because I don't want to broadcast the sounds. And of course, Steam is now going to check for updates and. See if I can remember. And of course, Steam has an update. Yeah, that sounds right. From what I remember, when I did those scenarios, it does teach you quite well how to drive. It teaches you how to drive the trains. It doesn't teach you how to drive the application. So once you've been through the tutorials, it is a little bit of trial and error working out where to go in the menus. This is taking a while to start Steam up, so. Okay. Excuse me. I now have to put my password in. Why? Oh yeah. Steam's a shot. I forgot it's a full screen app as well. Now we see how well Train Simulator works with OBS and a stream coming down at the same time. I turned down.
I think driving a train is easy, and anyone can.
Sorry about that. Let me turn the volume down. Yeah, I turned the system sounds down. I forgot to turn this sound actually down. It is quite a long loading time, especially on mine because I haven't loaded it for a while. So Steam had to update, then Steam had to load, then the game had to load, then it to update its database, and then you got it. So, but it is it can actually take a little while. We just get rid of that. So now then, yeah, Academy is where you would go. What you then do is on the right hand side is what they call the scenarios, and you can see from the scenario names, it's talking about which trains and types of controls you want to look at. So one of the things it does is like I've got one here. It says a class 170 primary controls. On the left hand side it will then show you a picture of the class 170, which is a diesel multiple unit, and it tells you a little bit about what it's going to teach you about. You just then basically click start and it'll go through it. I would step through I suppose either step through those or at least pick one of the trains and go through like the 170. I don't know if you get the 170, but like the 170, go through the primary controls, the secondary controls and things like that. Depends on whether you're interested in the electrics, diesel electrics, or the steam engines. Steam is hard to drive, but once you've kind of got the hang of it, so you got the controls, then it'll teach you about driving, like coupling and uncoupling of carriages, which some of the scenarios need. And I think there's some sections in there. Yeah, signalling is definitely worth going through as well to learn that. Although I think there's a manual available, which will take you through sort of the English and the German and the American signalling systems. They're all subtly different, which can be a pain. In fact, usually the hardest thing is working out which signal is yours. But once then, yeah, I don't turn. To be honest, I quite like it. I don't play it that often. But then once you've been through the academy and you've got the basics, it's then into the drive section, and which is the first element on the menu. And quick drive allows you to select everything yourself, but you actually have to select everything yourself, and you kind of got to know what you can and can't do. So to start with, I'd probably start with career. And then that's very similar to the academy in that on the right hand side you've got a list of all, they call it scenarios, and if you select one of them, it'll show you on the left hand side again what it is. So I mean, I've just picked one here, which is because this is an engine I've bought, which is the Deltic. It's a big old diesel class 55. And this one is on the East Coast Main Line because that's where I live, up on the East Coast Main Line. I think this one's somewhere near York, I think this particular scenario is. So it shows you it on the left hand side. It's in autumn, it's a clear day, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. And it's a 90-minute scenario. One of the things when you're doing scenarios, look at how much time you've got, and then go down your scenario list. Because some of them are easily 1.5, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, some of the scenarios. And if you've only got 30 minutes, you don't want to be doing one of those because you don't finish it. Once you've done a few scenarios, you've got an idea, then try things like quick drive if you want to. But to be honest, the scenarios are more fun than the quick drives, because with a quick drive, generally speaking, all the signals are green. There's no reason to stop. You stop where you like. It's a bit like playing a racing game where you're the only car on the track and you've nothing to race against. Quick drive is a bit like that for the rail simulator. You go where you like. but no reason to stop, no reason to look at signals, and it's meh. So, but you're hopefully you'll have fun with it anyway. I thought you were saving up anyway. I thought you were getting something else first. You've just been watching too many of Matt, and he's got really inspired you to have a go. Oh, I tell you what, it probably is, isn't it? There's a Steam sale on for Train Simulator. Is that what's happened? You've quite a few things. There's something like anything up to about 90% off on some of the things. Which reminds me, I should have a look myself. Dear. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. It's a lot of people have done that with Train Simulator. Why do I want to? No. They watch a few videos and they start. Well, that's quite interesting. And then about a few days later, they're asking questions as you just did. Then, how do I do this? And what train do I need for that? I've seen it happen in Matt's stream so many times. It's quite funny. Just so I'm kind of laughing at the scenario, not at you. Ah dear, yeah, Steam sale. I'll have to have a look myself. To be honest, unless you really want to, really want a route or a train, wait for the sales, because they are often something like anything up to 90% off. Yeah, and that's another one. That and the truck simulator as well. There are so many people, and I've seen some big streamers as well, you know, that are on Twitch. They'll go, truck simulator or farming simulator, and you just driving on a road, isn't it? And farming simulator's the same, and eventually the stream will persuade them to try it, or they try it thinking that they're going to make fun of it, and very quickly they're really seriously into it, having done thousands of hours of driving, and it's amazing how they get you. Those three applications, they sort of hook you somehow. I really don't understand myself what it is about them that keeps you going back to them, but you do. And the train simulator one, especially, some of the scenarios you get rated silver, gold, and what have you. And some of them are really tight time tables. And things like a London to Brighton one, I must have done that one about 60 or 70 times, trying to get and stick to the timetable, and I just keep trying again and again. And it's needing to learn the route and how quickly the trains brake and things like that. But I really don't understand what it is. And I've done a few hundred hours in truck simulator. I've done at least a few hundred hours in farming simulator as well, and I just keep going back. Amazing stuff. There's not many games I've done that with, but certainly those three simulators I have. Anyway, it's half making me want to try again, but I've got to get either the wheel out or the train controller, the rail driver out, and it's a big thing, and it goes here and I can't stream. It's too much faffing about at the moment. Anyway, as I said, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to go get myself a drink. I'll look forward to seeing you streaming that Just Jessup, your new game there. Certainly, I'll be interested in hearing how you get on with it. So next time you're around, let me know how you've got on, how you're doing. And I keep thinking about you'll find out you can actually take pictures in that game as well, as you can in the others. I keep thinking about grabbing doing some scenarios and grabbing the pictures of some nice trains and things like that, and maybe using those and doing some art with those, and maybe doing that on stream as well. So that's not exactly, but it is sort of where the idea for the Punchcraft came from. For the that's kind of where I'll zoom this out as well because you won't see it otherwise. But that's kind of where the idea for this came from. I was playing the game and I thought I like that, and I didn't actually take a snapshot. I thought about it afterwards, and I then just did a Google search for the reference image. But and then I did a painting from it, and then I did this from it, but from my painting. But it's I kind of thought maybe I'll do some other things in Train Sim as well, and it's a good source for the art. Bubbles the monkey. Good evening. Okay. Do I follow you, Just Jessup? If not, I'm going to. I don't, but I just have. So if I get a chance, I shall have a watch if you do stream it. Unfortunately, Bubbles, I was going about 35 minutes ago, and then Just Jessup asked me about Train Simulator. So otherwise I'd gone. But how are you doing? Are you feeling better? Have you started streaming your the fuse beads again yet? Because I was going to catch up with you next time you did, and take a look at the character that you were doing, see how far you got. Is that a little bit as in a little bit tonight, or is that in a little bit as in the next couple of days or so? Thank you. I'm going to be around for a bit, so. Oh, you want to get it? Well, you want to get into the expert controls at some point. Just Jessup. It's it takes more skill, more learning, but it's a lot more fun to be able to use the expert controls. But take your time. In about 30 minutes. Okay, that's just enough time for me to get a cup of tea, or more than likely a cold drink. Actually, I've got some orange juice, I think, some cold orange juice, and I shall take a look at what you're doing. So everybody, anybody who is still watching me and isn't following, then of course I would very much like you to do so, but that's up to you. Yes, it's always the prep that takes the time. So please push the follow button, and I'm losing frames like mad. Wow. Something's going on. Well, it's about a good job I'm about to stop, isn't it? I am losing frames like mad here, so the connection may stabilise. It's going all over the place. We're losing about 1% of the frames. Let me cut the video bandwidth down a bit. Okay. Hopefully that'll cut the information down a bit. It's dropping frames left, right, and centre here. So I'm going to cut the stream anyway. I want to say thank you to everybody. that's been on tonight, and I'll hope to see you again tomorrow. I suspect you're not hearing me very well. This is going to be going absolutely crackers, so I'm going to say cheers everybody, and have a good evening. Of course, as soon as I go to the end plate, it stabilises, doesn't it? I was down to about 400 kilobits transmission rate. It kept bouncing from 400 kilobits all the way up to 1.8 megabits and down again. I suspect, well, it seems to be stabilising now. Obviously something was going on the internet. I was highly suspecting I was going to lose the connection, but it looks like it's stabilised just as I'm hanging up. So, but thank you everybody for putting up with that and sticking around and watching me this evening. It has been great fun having you there. If anybody wants to try and catch me tomorrow night, 8 PM, 2000 hours British summertime, 1900 hours GMT, or about 2 hours and 40 minutes ago in your own local time zone. But tomorrow. May well be on tomorrow afternoon and doing some jewellery. I have a necklace to finish for somebody, which I will hopefully get to tomorrow afternoon to carry on from where I left off today. And we may then have a play about with some other things as well. Normal carving will be resumed tomorrow night. So I am off now. I'm going to get a cup of tea, and then I'll get to see Bubbles when she goes live. Night everybody.